joining me now is Rashi Kilnani on the Indo-Canadian Report, and fans of astrology probably already know that a 13th Zodiac sign was recently added. The question is, does that mean that you're no longer the sign that you used to be? Well, Rashi has more on this whole story. Hi, Rashi.
Hi, Mark.
So what exactly, I mean, for those who missed this, what was the big news that changed things in astrology?
Well, in December last year, an astronomy professor named Park Kunkel noticed that the Earth's axis had shifted direction. And this is because of gravitational pull from the moon. What this basically means for those of us who don't spend too much time gazing at the stars is that the North Pole is now aimed at a different part of the sky. And this has changed the signs of the Zodiac, which are calculated by looking at the alignment with the stars. It's all very complicated, Mark. And as you said, a 13th sign of the Zodiac has been proposed. It's called Ophiuchus. I hope I said that right.
Ophiuchus. They couldn't have called it something simple like George.
No.
Ophiuchus. I was born under the sign of George. No, Ophiuchus. Okay. So are astrologers actually embracing this proposal by Mr. Kunkel?
Well, I read a lot about this issue while I was on vacation in India, and there was a lot out on this topic. It seems that the astrology community is quite divided on the issue, and there's also a division between astrologers and astronomers on it. Nadiya Shah is an astrologer based out of Toronto, and here's what she had to say about the supposed changes in the stars.
Absolutely nothing has changed astrologically. This 13th sign business, it's interesting. Astrologers are reacting to it a little bit differently. Some people feel a little bit attacked. We as astrologers certainly know what we're doing, and we have known about the precession of the equinoxes on which this astronomer is basing his whole thesis. We've known about this for a very, very long time. The ancients knew about the precession of the equinoxes. They saw that it was coming, and so they devised a calculation method that did not rely on the precession of the equinoxes.
Nadiya Shah says the story of the 13th sign is not new and has come up before with astrologers, and what's different now is that because of the internet, it's caught on like wildfire. Ms. Shah is, by the way, a Western astrologer and does not use Indian or Vedic astrology.
Okay, now you mentioned that this new zodiac sign was big news in the Indian press, so just exactly what role does astrology play in India?
Astrology is a big thing in India. When people are born, their date, time, and place of birth are given to an astrologer who prepares what's called a Janam Patri, or birth chart. And this predicts the future of the child and also tells us what his personality or her personality will be like. And even when deciding whether or not to marry someone, often families consult an astrologer. And this applies to all big decisions, whether to start a business, what job to take up, and where to buy a house.
All right, so this is the Janam Patri.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, was that the same case here in the Indo-Canadian community?
Well, it's still something that's done in the Indo-Canadian community, though really not close to the same level. People here are quite hush-hush about it, almost embarrassed. I mean, an astrologer in India is almost like a therapist, a family advisor, and they don't play quite as prominent of a role here in Canada, but they certainly do play a role. Like here, I've got a copy of this India Abroad magazines.
Okay, so it looks like a newspaper or something.
A newspaper, that's right, of designed for a Canadian audience, this one. And if you look here in the sections of classifieds at the back, you've got ad for
astrology.
There you go.
Download a sample page.
So there you go. It still does play some sort of a role here, but much more subdued.
Okay, but in India, of course, is modernizing quite a bit. So are people still clinging to the astrology traditions?
Oh, well, it's still very important, but it's adapted itself to work in a modern context. For example, some astrologers are using computer programs to kind of come up with these birth charts as opposed to, drawing them out by hand, which is time-consuming. And people can consult astrologers online. Now, in yesterday's Indo-Canadian report, we were talking about caste and marriage in India. And we mentioned the matrimonial website shadi.com. But when you register your profile there, you have the option to put in your astrological sign to find someone who's compatible through that. And Mark, you can actually get advanced degrees in astrology at some Indian universities. So that just shows how seriously it's still taken there.
Okay, but the first person we heard from that you had there, you said that she was based on Western astrology and not the astrology that people follow in India. So explain that a bit.
Well, Mark, that woman was Nadiya Shah, and she says the difference between the two, this Western and Vedic astrology, has to do with how zodiac signs are calculated.
Western astrologers are practicing a form of astrology that relies on a calculation method called tropical zodiac. We have devised a calculation method that is based on the path that the planets actually travel along the ecliptic, as opposed to Vedic astrologers who are looking at the actual constellations that the planets are in.
Pankaj Kohli has been training in Vedic astrology since 1990 when he lived in India, and he's been reading birth charts in Toronto since he came to Canada 7 years ago. And he says Vedic astrology looks at the position of the sun and the moon as well. He says the position of the sun is called Lagna, and the position of the moon is called Rashi.
Oh my!
Yes. So here's Pankaj Kohli with a little bit on that.
Rashi gives you an in-depth knowledge about the nature of a person, the way a person behaves, thinks, acts. And the Lagna gives you information about how a person would progress in life. With Western astrology, they believe in the 12 zodiac signs, but let's say 6 billion people have been born. They cannot be categorized in only 12 houses. There is a further subdivision based upon your Lagna, because a Lagna changes a house position every 2 hours.
Now, because of the movements of the sun and the moon, the Lagna and the Rashi, Pankaj Kohli says this explains how twins born just minutes apart can have distinct personalities.
Aha! Now, what about are both Western and Vedic astrology affected by these planetary changes?
Well, as we heard earlier, astrologers are quite divided about this 13th planet, and Pankaj Kohli says it does not apply to Vedic astrology. He says it did cause concern, though, amongst some of his clients.
I did get a couple of calls, primarily not from the people of Indian or Asian descent. I got a couple of calls from the Canadian or the North American people of the North American descent. So they were particularly interested in knowing that will that impact their life, and the answer was no. It would still have the same kind of an impact.
Pankaj Kohli says those who know more about Vedic astrology, who would be people of Indian origin, would have more of an idea that Vedic astrology is not really affected by this new change. Nadiya Shah says that she was inundated with phone calls and messages from people worried about whether or not they're still the same sign and what this means for them. She says, though, there are perks to this controversy.
The unintended benefit of this has been that we've seen how many people actually care about astrology, and we've seen how many people actually want to know and want to discover something about themselves in terms of what is my sign. They're starting to think, do I actually relate to my sign? And that has been very encouraging.
So what do you think about this change in stars? And do you consult an astrologer for any major decisions in your life? We'd love to hear from you.
All right, Rashi, thanks very much for this.
Thanks, Mark.
That's Rashi Moon Kilnani here on the Indo-Canadian Report. And if you'd like to contact us, our address is the link at rcinet.ca.